when I think about how you go about, creating change in DE&I or creating just change in general, an advisor of mine once said, you can't boil the ocean. And so, if you're going to create change, you have to think about what is the change that you can control, and then how are you going to systematically go about it? Because you have to really think about it. I don't know if any of you are trained project managers, but in project management training, they talk about that there are certain steps you're going to have to take before you can do other things. So, if you need to get to step 10, right, do you need to do steps 1 through 9 to actually complete step 10? Or do you have to, are there other things that impact, right? And so it's really thinking about looking at the journey that you need to be on and breaking it up into small incremental pieces. I'll give a really great example here. So as you said, I work for a global organization. And in 2020, we were going after a global gender equality certification. And we had looked through the methodology. And initially I said, if we need to have global parental leave, right? It's the right thing to do, but it's what's going to get us, because there's a couple different levels of certification, and that's what's going to get us to the next level. But then I started to understand the methodology more that they were using in their certification process. And I realized that getting global parental leave at that moment in time, while it's a really great thing for our company, actually is not going to move the needle in our certification level. However, if I went after a policy on pay equity, that actually was going to give us, when thinking about all of the pillars in their methodology strategy, for the certification, that was going to put us over the threshold to get to the next level of certification. And the reason why I say that is because as a corporation, as any company, you want to get recognized for the great things that you're doing. And sometimes leaders are going to want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes they're going to want to do the right thing because of the shiny award that they can put on their desk or put on the, in the reception area for when people come to see. Now, I don't care how people are going to get to the end result. If I need to convince a leader that the only reason that they're going to create a policy change to be more inclusive is to get an award from some organization, the end goal is still the same. So by understanding the methodology and how you go about creating change, you can figure out what are the things that are going to move the needle. And so we did that. And so we implemented the pay equity policy. And then when I said, hey, you got this next level of certification. If you want the next one, here's what you need to do, people. And global parental leave is one of those things that we actually are implementing global parental leave, 16 weeks of paid leave for both men and women within the first year of adoption or birth of a child. But that's just like another step, because what we then need to be able to do we then need to track parental leave. We need to make sure that men and women are using it equally, but I needed parental leave to get launched this year so that when we come for our certification cycle again in 2024, I'm able to prove that we actually implemented it and that people were using it. So it's understanding about what needs to happen when, basically building that action plan. But it's not just a feel-good action plan. It's an action plan that's grounded in data.
Thank you. I mean, again, so much to unpack there, but let's backtrack again. In order to get to the pay equity, what steps did you have to take because this is a long process. Sometimes we see organizations saying we have an 18-month strategy and we're going to make it, or we have a 3-year plan where you're going to make it. But in reality, this is for the long haul. So backtracking, how did you get to that first step of pay equity?
Um, well, I mean, it was just, how do I want to answer this? So in our organization, we actually feel that we could have gotten this certification around pay equity for a number of years. We just never actually had somebody focus on it. And honestly, what it was actually just putting everything down on paper, because the Edge, the organization that we use for gender equality, if it's not written down, it doesn't count. So if
Mm.
it's a policy or a practice that you say you just do, right, and everybody knows about it, they don't care, right? So it needs to be on paper. It needs to be accessible by every employee in the organization. And there's no question about what the policy states. So honestly, for the pay equity policy, it was just putting everything down on paper, right? We've never put it on paper before. And so it was also getting the organization to feel comfortable writing these policies out. And it actually served us really well, because at the time we were an organization that was 7,500 employees just a couple years ago. And we're now an organization of 24,000. And so, and that's through 2 acquisitions that just happened in the past 3 years. We need to be an organization that has things written down in policy. When you're an organization that's 7,500 people, you can operate very differently than an organization that's 25,000. And so it has served us well to understand that we need to have things in writing, and to get us prepared for who we are as an organization today. And then, but it's a way to hold us accountable. It's also a way for when we talk about, if an employee says, I feel that there's a gender pay gap, we actually now have a methodology and a standard process to evaluate it. It's not, oh, well, somebody made up this algorithm over here and somebody made up this algorithm over here. We now have a global standard for how we look at pay equity at IFF. And so, and we're actually very public about that we use Edge for our pay equity, and Edge's pay equity tool, the methodology is actually posted online on their own website. So it is very transparent on how we do pay equity at IFF.
So right there, there's the audience has a takeaway right there. If they go on the website of Edge, you can literally see the methodology of how to create pay equity within your own organization, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so if you go to, if you Google, well, if you Google Edge strategy, you can find them, so, and they're a global organization. They work with companies all over the place.
That's awesome. Now, having said that, how do you move past a company that seems to be a little more performative with their behavior? You mentioned certifications and the shiny award, pay to play. You talked about one time I heard. How do you move past that performative behavior into real change?
Well, so I think you're going to have leaders in your organization that uh, are going to either want to create change organically, or they're going to do it kicking and screaming. And the kicking and screaming ones are the ones that want this nice shiny object. What I would say is that you need to start partnering with the folks that want to do it for the right reason, right? And then your organization is just going to have to start making a decision about what type of leader do you want in your organization. The State Department, has come out with this really awesome philosophy around who should be leaders in their organization. Anybody now that wants a promotion in the State Department needs to write a statement on their commitment to diversity and inclusion. and it is part of their evaluation process on whether or not they should be a leader in that organization. I'm looking to see how we can do that in our own organization, because it's starting to create what are the principles of who you are as an organization, and do your leaders espouse those principles. We have a new CEO at IFF, and he's been here just over 90 days. And he has shared that what he wants to make sure our organization is focused on is accountability, collaboration, and execution. And so for me, this is great news for me, especially in the accountability piece, because we have our own DE&I targets. You know, we have 2030 goals that we're trying to achieve. And now it's about holding people accountable, right? It's not a matter of let's hope we can recruit more women and get more women in leadership roles. We have a commitment. And so now it's about holding people accountable. I just had to send an email last night to senior leaders and their HR leaders to say, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And we're done being nice, right? If anybody out there says that having a job in the diversity, equity, inclusion space is about kumbaya and being nice to everybody, I have another story for you, right? This is hard work, right? You do not sign up for this type of a job because it's the nice thing to do. We are here to create institutional change. That does not just happen, right? You need leaders who are going to roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty, and be committed to the work. And if they're not, then the organization needs to say, then you are no longer a leader here. And it's going to take a while to get there. But that's the journey you need to be on. And it's about making choices, right? Having a diverse organization is a choice, right? It's not just something that is just going to happen, right? One of the things that really infuriates me is when I talk to some business leaders and I say, well, why aren't you hiring, more women or more people of color into your roles? And they're like, well, they don't apply. BS, right? Like, I'm just going to call it, right? My response is, okay, well, the system broke down, because then we are not advertising in the right talent pools. Then the talent acquisition team did not go out and actively source diverse candidates. The hiring manager just did not push back on the talent acquisition team to say, you are not presenting me diverse candidates, go back and find them, right? When we do that, we actually get diverse candidates. And so it's about everybody holding each other accountable and being active, making an active choice of actually getting more women, people of color, people with disabilities, people, name the category, right? But it's an active choice, because if you're just passive about it, passive is going to get you the same thing. You have to be actively involved in the process. It takes energy.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Now, you talked about accountability, you talked about decision makers being on board. How about when there's pushback? How do you use inclusive language to work around the pushback, to bring this level of awareness that you were talking about? When someone answers you point blank, nobody applied, no diverse candidates applied. What is it that you do, and how do you insert policy to support that?
So one of the things that we have is we require diverse candidate slates. And if we're on our own maturity journey, right? So we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But what we're doing now is that so a couple years ago, we introduced diverse candidate slates, and it was all about just reporting. We are now at a stage where if we're going to be putting in a process where myself and the director of talent acquisition for our more senior levels in the organization, we have to sign off on the candidate slate. before they can, advance. And we're not going to stop a recruitment from happening. But what we're going to do is, if the candidate slate is not diverse, they need to justify why it's not diverse, right? So, and if they come back with a really lame answer, like, oh, nobody applied, then we're going to say, stop, go back to the drawing board. But if they can prove that they've sourced, right? And for whatever reason, right? Like, oh, well, the candidates that we interviewed, are not willing to relocate. And this job requires it to be here, right? The other thing that we're trying to do is to get the organization to move to more of the move the job to the person and not move the person to the job, right? Because that's really going to expand our candidate pool. That is a monumental lift, right? That is a culture change that we're needing to make, because that is not the type of organization we are today, but we're trying to move there. But what we're doing is we're holding people accountable. We used to, when we would share the gender stats, right, inside the business, I would go to each of the business leaders themselves and say, here is your number, here is your number. Not anymore. Everybody, here's the numbers for the organization. So, it's very clear on who's pulling their weight and who isn't, right? We have a gender stat. Our executives have a 5% of their bonus tied to reaching a certain level of women in leadership by the end of 2022. And it's a collective goal. So if the organization doesn't go from 36 to 37% this year collectively, then all the executives lose 5% of their bonus. So we're being very honest about what business unit and function is not pulling their weight, right? Because you're going to have to create a little friendly competition, right? You got to and also, if you don't put money around your DE&I goals, nobody's going to listen to you, right? You are talking to people who run a business. It's all about making money. So if you want them to make change, talk to them in their language that they know, the dollar. So if they don't want to lose 5% of their bonus, and I think most of their bonuses is probably equal to my annual salary, right? That's nothing to laugh at, right? So if they want 5% of that bonus, then they're going to have to do what's required, right? And to be quite honest, we are now in June, we are halfway through the year, and they are scared that they're not going to meet that AIP goal. And so what we're saying is like, look, well, then do something. You are the decision makers. I can't decide on who you're going to hire. I can only shine a mirror, right, to you and show you the reflection of your organization. You have to be the ones that make the decision to make the change. Again, it's a choice.
And that's using the data-centered approach to improve your organization.
Right.
So
It's being very, very specific, right? It's not like, we're breaking it down by job level, by business unit. I had a business leader come and say, oh, well, I run a manufacturing organization. And so we don't have a lot of women. And I broke it out and been like, well, here's one area of your business that's 60% women. Or I look at junior management to middle management, and I see that we're, yes, in manufacturing, it's around 25% women in leadership. But then when I look at in junior management, but then I look at middle management and it's 7%, my question is, why is it falling off? All I'm asking you to do is be less bad. I'm not asking you to get to 50% tomorrow. What I'm just asking you to do is make your organization representative of who your organization is today. Denise, I see you keep raising your hand, so I want to make sure I let you talk. You're on mute.
Yeah, we have questions coming through, and I just to get some of the questions in before we move to the next phase.
Yeah,
and so a couple of things is, it seems like across the board, everyone loves your truth and accountability and the way that you're blending the two so that you're producing positive change and positive action. So kudos to you on that one. The one question was, once you get the diverse candidates hired, and they're in the roles, how do you retain those individuals?
So that's when you start talking about inclusion. And so you need to make sure that you have good policies, right? So let's just kind of like break it down. So why are we rolling out global parental leave? We know that our data shows that we are actually losing our junior employees who are in that child rearing years because they're going to other employers that have better parental leave policies than we do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So so then that's going to help us also attract, but then it's also speaking to who we are as an organization. Okay, then what are you doing about eliminating unconscious bias? You know, what type of educational experiences are you doing for your organization? What type of employee resource groups, we call them colleague communities at IFF, do you have in your organization? What's the, you see that we have a rainbow treatment to our logo, right? It's for Pride Month. What are you doing for LGBT employees the other 11 months of the year?
Mm.
Right? What are you doing for your Black employees January to January, or March to January, outside of February, right? It's not just about, oh, it's Black History Month, let's talk about, you know, Black employees. It's Pride Month, it's International Women's Day. You need to be talking about this year round. The way we treat our, you know, International Women's Day, Black History Month, Pride, International Persons with Day with Disabilities, it's a day that we celebrate the achievements that we achieved over the last year, and it's a recommitment to the path forward.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh, love that.
So it's recognizing the successes that we've had, but also recognizing the work that is still left to be done. And what are we doing throughout the year to make sure that our colleagues know that they can bring their whole selves to work? And then it's also measuring inclusion, right? That's hard. You can measure diversity, right? People can check a box, you can code it in your HR system. I can tell you almost on a daily basis how many women I have in my organization at any given time, right? I can pull that data. It's hard to measure inclusion, but you can, right? So here's some ways, so bringing it back to the data, right? Mm-hmm. Ways that you can measure inclusion. Self-identification. Mm-hmm. If you do not have a self-identification program, it's going to be hard for you to measure inclusion, because when you roll it out, and you have to give everybody the choice of choose not to identify, you can, so if you have a high level of individuals who are responding to your self-ID program, but also have a high level of individuals who are saying, I choose not to identify, you're not creating an inclusive organization for them. I can give you a great example. We ran our first our global survey for EDGE in July 2020. And in the United States, we piloted a self-ID component to that because we wanted to see the impact. Everybody knows what was happening during the summer of 2020. And when we got the results back, and we specifically asked one of the race ethnicity category, every category but Black matched our headcount data. Mm. We had a high number of people answering, I choose not to identify. If I added up the number of people who did identify as Black and chose I choose not to identify, matched what we knew in our headcount system as Black employees. That told me Black employees were not feeling included. It made sense. Summer of 2020, George Floyd's murder, everything else that's going on. So to me, it made sense. I understood it, but that measured inclusion. And so for me, that's why I'm driving really hard to get a self-ID program in our organization, because I know that that's the way that's the data point that I'm going to use around inclusion.
Mhm. Great, great.
Quick question. How do you incorporate intersectionality in that?
Oh, wow, that's a really great question. So, it's really starting to dive into the data, right? So it's when we do an inclusion survey, right? So like I'm gonna, so in our edge survey, we asked a bunch of demographics in the United States. The GDPR runs like you have to navigate a really tight, you have to walk a tightrope with GDPR. So it's very hard to ask demographic questions in a lot of European countries, but we're working on it. But what I will say, it's about understanding, slicing the data, right? So it's not just looking at what do women say and what do, Black or Hispanic, Asian employees say. It's what does the female, Black, lesbian, disabled woman have to say, right? Slicing and dicing it a couple different ways, because you don't want to just silo and say, well, women are answering this way, right? I need to understand, are white women and women of color answering the question the same way, or are they not? Right? So it's that you have to have the data to be able to be able to do that, but it's making sure that you're asking the queries in the right way to get you the answers that you're looking for.
Mhm.
And Denise, I'd like to ask the audience, do you guys want us to break out into breakout rooms, or do you want to keep asking questions of Chris and let's take up the rest of the time and getting his expertise?
I would be welcome to take questions directly from folks. I mean, it's a small group. So, I mean,
Type in the chat box if you guys want to. Yes, let's talk more to Chris. And then Denise, if you have another question that you saw there.
Yep. So one of the questions that we have here, stay in this group. Okay, good. All the individual, what are the key success metrics that organizations and all the individual departments are accountable for? Can you give us some examples that let you know by organization? So you remember you said something about the scorecard. What are the, what does the kind of the scorecard look like, and what metrics are most important that you look at, or your CEO or whoever else looks at, to hold people accountable?
so right now we are we're looking at gender diversity within mid and senior leadership. We're looking at racial diversity in the United States, in U.S. management, in the U.S., but starting to look at other things, other locations with race and ethnicity, where we can. For the first time this year, we actually published our numbers for Brazil in our sustainability report, which we've never been able to do before. But so it's around gender, it's around race. We have something called the inclusion competency model, where employees are able to add an inclusion competency as part of their personal development plan in our performance management system. So we are tracking the number of employees who are adding that as a way of, it's a way of measuring commitment to inclusion. And so we publish those numbers internally. We have a global number. We had 15% of our organization add an inclusion competency as part of their development plan in 2021. We're looking to expand that number. So, it's different pieces. All of our executive committee members are an executive sponsor to one of our employee resource groups. We are going to be rolling out a reverse mentor program. It's going to be voluntary for the executive committee and their direct reports. However, I know that the executive committee members have said to their direct reports, you're all participating, oh, by the way, right? So we're going to see how many people actually do participate. So hopefully that answers your question, Denise.
Yeah. We have a question from Susan. What has been the most successful measure to date for you?
Successful. Well, I think there's a couple ways to potentially answer that. Successful to me, so I'll answer it two ways. Successful in getting the organization to make the change that I want it to make is probably around our EDGE certification, our gender equality, because we started this journey in 2019. And I truly believe that if we hadn't started when we started, and understood where our gaps were, we would not be rolling out global parental leave on June 30th of this year, right? So for me, the success is about setting a baseline. And you know, we work with an LGBT organization out of Amsterdam, and they have a global index. Last year we got a 20% out of 100. This year we got a 50.5% out of 100. And I'm not saying that to brag, right? I'm saying that because we used the index from a data point of view to understand where could we make change quick, right? What were the quick wins? Because I didn't just focus on the really sexy, shiny, big object over here that everybody was paying attention to, right? I looked at everything and said, what can we accomplish? Oh, you know what? I can do this today, right? Nobody's going to know about it. Nobody's really, it has a big impact, but nobody's really going to see it, right? Because it's not a shiny thing that we're going to like tout. But now what I have done is I've gotten the organization to a point where I have been able to make all the change I can by myself. And so then I can go to the organization and been like, okay, if you want to go to the next level, I need your help, right? I'm doing this with the Disability Equality Index that Disability In runs. We are a best place to work for disability inclusion. We have 100% score. We've had 100% score for 3 years in a row. We started this journey a couple years ago as well. The first year we did it, we got a 10 out of 100. And so then we worked and said, okay, what can we do? Well, now we have 100 out of 100. Now I also know that their methodology is going to increase. And so now I'm going to some of my colleagues in different areas of the business, IT being one of them, and saying, okay, if you don't make this change that we need, right, more accessibility with technology and things, you are going to run the risk that we lose our best place to work for disability inclusion, right? So it's, again, it's the carrot and the stick approach. So I know there was an opposite question, because I was also looking at the chat about like what is the most surprising challenge the data has surfaced? Data integrity. Just data integrity. You know, it's very much that garbage in versus garbage out. You know, so that's been the most surprising thing to me, is around data integrity.
How did you get around data integrity?
I'm still trying to get around it. You know, so so I say that jokingly. What we're doing is we're explaining to the folks who are doing the data entry why that data is important.
Right.
Because a couple years ago, nobody cared about a couple of these data points. Nobody was watching it, so nobody was auditing it. Nobody was asking the question, right? So nobody even knew that the data was wrong, right? And so some of it was just been like educating them that like, oh, wow, I had no idea I was putting wrong information in, right? Or anybody was paying attention. Now that we're starting to pay attention, you know, people are like, oh, right. Like, oh, I actually have to do this. Or I thought we were doing this, but guess what? Like, it's actually not turned on, and like you know, things fell through the cracks. So it's starting to, you know, it's one of the things when I talk to new HR colleagues, because I'm part of the, you know, I'm part of the onboarding process now of every new HR person, right? Every new HR person that comes into the organization has to meet with me.
Yay!
right? So I
Right?
talk to them about
That's
diversity
huge.
and inclusion, right? And so one of the things that I talk about is data integrity, because they have to enter the employee data into the system. And so I'm like, okay, so I need you to understand when you do your job, this is how it impacts me. And oh, by the way, we're making decisions on the data that we have. Now that we're a 24,000 person organization, I have to make the assumption that the data is correct. When it was 7,500, I could do a lot of data cleanup myself. Like I actually knew my organization inside out and backwards. Now that we're 24,000, it boggles my mind. Like I can't go clean 24,000 lines of data, just not possible, right? So what I'm saying to folks is when they say, well, the data's wrong, and I've been like, well, it's not my data, right? So if you feel the data is wrong, go in and fix it. Right. So the understanding the impact that we're making decisions on the data that's in the system. So if you want us to make right decisions, make sure the data is right to begin with.
Abby's asking, in your opinion, what impact has remote hybrid work had on inclusivity?
Oh, I think people are still trying to figure that out. I see webinars every day of been like, how to understand how the hybrid workforce, is impacting inclusivity. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was really nervous, right? I was really scared that we weren't in the office. We were going to lose all of their connections. If you think about it, we, um, we were getting ready to do, so March 2020, right, is basically when the world shut down, right? And so International Women's Day is on March 8th every year. And we were in New York City, and it was right around that time is when business started to close, right? And we were seeing the trend. And so the first initial thing was no large group gatherings, move all large meetings virtually. And we're like, oh my God, what are we going to do for International Women's Day? We have all these events planned. We moved to virtual. It was clunky, right? We got through it, but we took those lessons and we learned them. By June, right? So that was 2020. Pride 2019, we had 3 events. We celebrated Pride for the first time at IFF in 2019. It was awesome, right? I made our office as gay as possible. Rainbows were everywhere. But then we were coming to Pride 2020, and I'm thinking to myself, we had 3 events last year. They were all in person. How are we going to engage? Could not have gone better, right? We did 5 regional events. We did a virtual event in 5 regions. We had close to 3,000 employees attend a Pride event in 2020. Now, if we were still doing it in person, right, we would have probably expanded to, because in my work objectives, when I put my work objectives together for 2020, it was like, go from 3 in-person events to 5, right?
Mhm.
And, so, so I blew my objectives out of the water for 2020, right? The interesting thing is that, making sure your employee resource groups are adapting. This is a struggle for some. So we have our women's, our women at IFF group. They matured before the pandemic, right? So they were very chapter based. And we've had several colleague communities start during the pandemic. And so they're non-chapter based. And so they're very like work stream based. And now that we're coming back into the office, well, Women at IFF is struggling because we have a lot of people who are remote and they're not connected to an office. So they're not participating in a particular chapter. They don't feel connected to the group. And so they're trying to say, okay, how do we adapt our model to engage our employees where they are? Then we have the colleague communities that started during the pandemic who were completely virtual and had no chapter type of organization. People are now starting to return to work and say, I want a chapter. I want to do things locally, and they're not set up to do it. So it's creating challenges on both ends. What I would say is, it's a crutch for anybody to say you can't have inclusivity in a remote workforce. It's a crutch. It's yes, do I wish I was seeing my colleagues more in person? Absolutely. But it's, are you really creating those water cooler moments, right? We were just having this conversation in our HRLT meeting this morning, is about how do we create the ability to have more water cooler conversations virtually, right? So
What did you come up with?
don't know yet.
Still in the process.
So it's a process, right? So we definitely need to think about it, but it's a big topic of conversation.
So we have another question. Denise is asking, how many people are in your group? Are you a lone ranger?
Well, that's a really good question. So I have 2 people that report to me, but I have a ton of volunteers in the organization. And so I used to be a lone ranger, not anymore. But we're also going through kind of a reorganization in our HR model. And so really trying to embed DE&I into our HR roles more than they have been. We are going to start piloting actually having DE&I champions in our business units. So having somebody who is in the executive leadership team of each of the divisions and functions have the role of a DE&I champion, so that we're really spreading the wealth. It's going to make my job a lot more interesting, because I potentially could lose control, but we're really trying to really get our hands around it so that it's we're spreading the wealth and putting the accountability, because I come to work every day trying to get unemployed. My goal is to not need chief DE&I officers, right? Now, I have a lot of job security, so I'm not worried to be able to provide for my family, right? But when I log into work every day, my goal is, what can I do so that I could retire sooner than later?
Again, there's so
Yeah.
much here to unpack. Oh, you were going to say
Can we get
something?
one? Yeah. Can we get one question in from Ryan? He's been waiting patiently.
Definitely. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Your hand is up. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to share something. So I am the corporate recruiter for a tech company based out of SLO. We're a startup. We're almost 3 years old, and went through some really rapid growth. In about 6 months, we doubled our workforce. And one thing that I've done just to kind of maintain that diversity within our organization is being very strategic. Your TA team really needs to see what applicants they're getting and seek out the applicants that they're not getting. I recently just changed my LinkedIn, and I put, I'm a gay man. I look like a cisgendered white man to everyone else, but I put a little rainbow flag next to my name, so that when I'm reaching out to people on LinkedIn, trying to get them to talk to me about coming to work for our company, they realize, okay, well, this company must be pretty cool because they have an openly gay man as their recruiter. Just doing small things like that. And then joining, we use a lot of Slack, joining a lot of different Slack channels. I'm part of an Out in Tech Slack channel, so I'll post our jobs into there. We just hired a sales development representative that's part of Sisters in Sales. So getting her to reach out to her network and really networking and working with parts of your organization that can reach out to those groups for you. Even with our massive growth, we are pretty much almost completely split 50-50 company-wide male and female, which is unheard of in the tech industry, especially in the startup industry. And then just kind of talk about what Chris mentioned about, gathering data. We were just named a certified best place to work. And one of the questions they asked is, do you identify as part of the LGBTQIA community? And me, I'm very open about who I am. I only know of 2 other people within our organization that are openly part of that community. And we had results come back that 8% of our company identifies as part of that community. So you may not necessarily know how someone identifies, or what nationality they identify as, without getting this data. And we were honestly pleasantly surprised that one of our employees who appears, I appear as a white man, but my mom is Mexican and Native American. You know, I identify with more that part of my family rather than the white side of my dad's family. So, you know, just because someone may look a certain way, when you look at them, that may not be how they identify and how they feel inside. So just to touch on that, you know, that getting that data is so important, because you honestly would be surprised at who you do have working for you already.
And the data is going to look different globally, right? Because when you think about it, everybody who comes from Brazil is considered Hispanic. But guess what? There's white Brazilians and black Brazilians. And so, you know, and it's very interesting when we have a lot of leadership come from Brazil into North America in our organization. And a lot of folks have been like, I'm not Hispanic, I'm white, right? And so it's really, you know, we're like, oh, yay, we have some more people from Brazil. Like, they're like, no. Like, I don't consider myself to be Hispanic, right? I'm a European descent. I just happen to have been born in Brazil, right? And so it's very fascinating, those type of conversations. And so what I say to people is that we just have to go by what people identify in the system. And that's why it's self-ID, because it is truly self-identification, right? We're going to take the individual at their word that they are identifying the way that they know that they are.
And within the last 2 to 3 minutes that we have, what are your parting words that someone can take action today within their own organization?
Just get started. Don't wait. Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Right? You know, if your data is bad, own it. Right? Own it. If you have good data, when I mean good data, I mean like clean data, like you actually can use it, but your numbers are not where you want them to be, like you don't have as many women as you want or people of color, own it. Be honest, right? Because, you know, we're all in this together. My favorite line from High School Musical. But, you know, it's truly a journey. And I come from the philosophy of it is no longer about a rising tide will rise all ships. It is a really rough sea out there. We have to tie our ships together because we have to weather the storm. There is so much that we are fighting against. It's tiring. I am tired. Right? I am physically tired, emotionally tired. This job is tiring, but you know what? I'm doing it because I love what I'm doing and I know I'm making change. But we also have to make sure that, especially our folks who are in the DE&I space, have the ability to check out when they need to check out. It is okay to pass the baton to somebody else and say, I need a mental break. Right? Because this can be a really tiring job, but it's get started. Don't let the perfect get in the good. Rely on others, right? You don't have to recreate the wheel, as they like to say, right? People have done this before, has done it before us. You know, when we created our colleague community program, I found somebody who published their employee resource manual online. I'll tell you, I read that through and I used a lot of it, right? Don't reinvent the wheel, right? Make it your own, right? But don't feel like you have to start from a blank sheet of paper. People have already done it. And I'll tell you, if you're not part of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, if your organization is not a signatory of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, become a signatory. There is so much free resources out there. I know because I'm publishing some of our resources to that data bank, right? That library that they have. I scour that. I pay money to Gartner to have a partnership, you know, an advisor on DE&I. Sometimes I find the CEO Action library to be more valuable than I do the Gartner library. And I'm paying a lot of money to them to have that advisoryship. Gartner is awesome. Do not say that I didn't. I'm saying Gartner not awesome. I'm making a joke, right?
And you're calling it, and it's called CEO Action Library.
Yeah, so the organization is called CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. It's run by PwC. To be a signatory, your CEO of your organization or whoever is your chief officer in your organization has to personally sign the pledge. But then once you sign, you get like, there's a plethora of stuff. And there is no requirement of size of an organization, right? Some places require you to be like a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 1000. Anybody can sign the CEO Action Pledge. And then there is a ton of resources out there for you that you can be part of it. So please, I know a bunch of you have been connecting with me on LinkedIn over the last hour, so please continue to do so. Happy to be a resource. Thank you for giving me this platform to talk with you all today. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Hopefully you got a lot out of this conversation too.
I want to thank